Just going to quickly show you where we are. Rabbi Shimon Rabbi Shimon. So this is Rabbi Shimon. Now, this Rabbi Shimon is quoted as Rabbi Shimon is one of the most oft quoted persons in the whole of the Mishna and Talmud, and almost always it refers to Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. There are other Rabbi Shimons, but usually the other Rabbi Shimons will be named as Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel or which Rabbi Shimon it is. And if it's a plain Rabbi Shimon, we know as Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. So let me pause for a moment my screen and just tell you a bit about Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. Now I understand that I've spoken about him in the past. We usually talk about his life when it comes to Lag BaOmer, because Lag BaOmer is the greatest Jewish celebration day in a sense of a person's passing. There's no other day in Jewish history that is celebrated as widely, no other day of passing that is as widely celebrated as the Yochai, the day of commemoration of Shimon bar Yochai. And unfortunately, this past year on his Yochai at his burial place, there was a terrible tragedy, similar to what happened in Astroworld in America, where there was a crowd crashing. But from all the reviews that have occurred, we understand that it was an error, it was a mistake in what occurred over there in Meron. It was always a risk because of the amount of people that attend. And unfortunately, this year, whatever was going to go wrong went wrong in the worst way possible. And 44 people passed away at Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai's passing, and something that we could never understand, because Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, why does everybody go there? It's because he wanted that everybody should celebrate his passing. He wanted to teach what he taught the world is the importance of the soul and how life doesn't end when the body dies. And that's really almost like a focal point of all of Kabbalah. And that's why his passing of everything becomes the most commemorated and celebrated passing in all of, even more than Moshe Rabbeinu. Moses passed away on Zayin Adar. Most people will do a small celebration or commemoration or at least a mention of Moshe's passing. But Lag BaOmer, we don't say Tachnun. We have incredible celebrations that occur on Lag BaOmer. Because what Lag BaOmer was all about is to show us the greatness of the soul and how people live on beyond their physical life. Okay? And that's very much connected to the statement that we have over here from him. So let me just how knowledgeable are people on the life of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai and what exactly happened to him? Who would like me to revisit his history, or who would prefer that we skipped it?
David? I don't know.
What do you say, David?
I don't know much about him.
Okay, so I think it's important that if we don't know much about him, that we do, because he is such a significant person historically. And I think, as I say, if this person has the most celebrated day of passing in all of Jewish history, in all of the entire Jewish calendar, then he's certainly an extremely important figure. So I'll start from the beginning. The reason why I decided to focus on his personality rather than his actual statement is because his statement is very similar to the statements that we had last week. But when you put it in context of his life, you see that it's far more powerful once you understand the context of his life and how this was common, almost like a central concept within his life. So Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai was born at the end of the Second Temple era. His parents were extremely old and had no children. And as we understand, very poor, which is interesting because other great momentous individuals like the parents of the Baal Shem Tov were very similar. The Baal Shem Tov's parents were extremely old. There's even a legend, they said that his father and his mother were like almost like Avram and Sarah, 90 and 100 years old. But we understand Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who started the Kabbalah movement, who wrote the Zohar, his parents were very old and they had no children. And at a very old age, they have this child, Shimon, who is obviously orphaned at a young age because his parents are so old. His teacher is Rabbi Akiva. Now, Rabbi Akiva is one of the greatest teachers in all of Jewish history as well. And famously, Rabbi Akiva is the most famous teacher of the time, the greatest teacher of the time, and he remains that way for all of Jewish history. But we also know that during the 1 year of the Sfirat Omer, a plague breaks out, and 24,000 primary students of Rabbi Akiva die. And as a result, he's left with almost no students. And you would think that that would be devastating. But what we see is sometimes you don't need to have a lot. Sometimes quality overweights a quantity. So while he may have had the most amount of students at the time by far, but then he's left with 5 students. But these 5 students all end up becoming the greatest rabbis in history. In the next era. They are the leaders of the next era. So you would have thought that everything was lost, but actually he was able to rebuild and focus on these 5 students. And of course, the prize one of these 5 students was Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. And he rebuilds Judaism on them, and they all consider themselves the successors of Rabbi Shimon, of Rabbi Akiva. And certainly Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is no less than that. Now, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, we know that Rabbi Akiva has a terrible passing. We spoke about last week, the 10 martyrs. And Rabbi Akiva is one of those 10 martyrs. And Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai witnesses that passing. And he's got, out of all the 10 martyrs, Rabbi Akiva has the worst experience. His skin is peeled while he's alive, peeled off his body. And that was done by the Romans for Rabbi Akiva being such a great rabbi and teaching Torah in public. Rabbi Shimon never forgives the Romans for what they did to his teacher and for what they had done to Judaism in general. That was after the destruction of the temple, quite a while after the destruction of the temple, that they outlawed Torah study. And once he is busy having a discussion with one of his students, who was Rabbi Yehuda, who was going to eventually author the Mishna, Rabbi, known as Rabbi, and another great rabbi named Rabbi Yosef, and the 3 of them are talking about the Romans and what the Romans had contributed. So Rabbi says, well, the Romans weren't too bad. They brought us highways, and they built up. They were able to develop to a certain degree the land of Israel. So he says something positive about them. But sometimes you say something positive, it also brings out the negative things. And Rabbi Shimon says, well, no, they have done it. Yes, they may have built roads, but all of them was just to collect taxes and only to benefit themselves. They had no interest in developing a country for our benefit. Now, the other rabbi was Rabbi Yosef. He doesn't say anything. Little did they know, there was a man by the name of Yehuda ben Yair, who overheard this conversation between these 3 great rabbis. And he is an informer to the Romans, and he goes and tells the Romans about this conversation. So the Romans hear about the conversation. They say, well, Rabbi Yehuda, he spoke positively about us. He should become the new leader of the Jewish people. And he is appointed leader, and he is a great rabbi, and he's one of the greatest rabbis in Jewish history. So Rabbi becomes. Rabbi Shimon, who spoke ill of the Romans, he should be put to death. You're not allowed to talk against the Romans. And Rav Yosef didn't say anything. He should be exiled for not saying anything. He should have, so to speak, spoken up against Rabbi Shimon. So Rabbi Shimon escapes. He first hides in the Bet Midrash, and his wife brings him food every day. And then they realize that they're actually putting themselves and his wife at risk. He hides with his son, who is his prize student, Rabbi Elazar, and they're hiding. And eventually, they realize it's too dangerous to hide in the shul, and he runs away and he hides in a cave. And he doesn't tell his wife where he's going. He doesn't want to put her in a predicament where she can have to suffer because of her. And he stays there and he lives in this cave with his son, Elazar, where nobody knows about their whereabouts for 12 years. And we're told that those 12 years, that's when he just spends the entire day studying. He doesn't have any clothes, and miraculously, a carob tree grows. Carob trees usually take tens of years to grow, but in a short amount of time, a carob tree grows, and there's a wellspring, and they survive off the carobs and the water for 12 years, hiding from the Romans. And they just sit there studying Torah, and they become the great Torah scholars that they are. And we're told that those 12 years, that's when Rabbi Shimon writes the Zohar, in that period of time as well. After 12 years, the Romans have now forgotten about Rabbi Shimon. They've given up on him, and they forgot about him. So Elijah, the prophet, comes and says that, he comes down and he says, Rabbi Shimon, they no longer are searching for you. You can go out. So they leave, but they don't realize that they have spent the last 12 years, literally every single moment, besides for when they were sleeping and the small amount that they ate, studying, and they have become different people. They no longer remember the world as it was. They haven't seen, there's been no internet. They've seen nothing of the regular world for 12 years. So they come out and they see somebody plowing a field, and they are in shock to see somebody doing mundane work. And Rabbi Shimon makes a statement, and he says that they leave the life of eternity, which is the study of Torah, which lasts forever, and they're doing life of temporary work. And when he says that, the entire field goes on fire, and the person dies, the farmer. So a heavenly voice comes down from heaven and says, Rabbi Shimon, you've been hiding away from the world for 12 years. Did you come out now? Did I tell you to come out in order to destroy the world? You obviously are not ready to your level. In other words, you've risen to a great level, but at the same time, you've left the world behind. You aren't able to connect your greatness to the world. And that's why you're destroying the world. So therefore, you have to go back in the cave. Rabbi Eliezer and his son go back into the cave, and I think this time, the 13th year that they're there, they have more of a focus on understanding the importance of the world and doing mitzvot, and not just the loftiness of Torah study for its own sake. And a year later, they decide, you know what, they're ready to come out, and they come out and they're walking, and they see somebody carrying beautiful bundles of flowers. And it's Erev Shabbat, it's just before Shabbat, and they ask the man, tell me, why are you taking these, what are these flowers? He says, it's there to grace my Shabbat table, to make my Shabbat table beautiful. So they said, why do you have two bundles? Why is one bundle not enough? So he says, one is for Zachor and one is for Shamor. We know that we have two, we always do things in twos on Shabbat, because there's the double portion of the manna, and also because in the 10 commandments of the command for Shabbat, the one time it says the word Zachor, one time it says the term Shamor, which is why we do tell a discussion for another time. And Rabbi Shimon turns to his son and he says, look how great these people are, that they go out of their ways to sanctify godliness and bring godliness down into the mundane world. And with that statement, they are, you could tell that they are ready to enter the world as from their lofty level. So they are then greeted by Rabbi Shimon's father-in-law named Pinchas ben Yair, who was considered one of the great rabbis at the time. And he sees Rabbi Shimon, who's like his stick and bones, and his skin is in terrible condition. He breaks down crying. And Rabbi Shimon says, no, don't cry for me, my friend, because these 13 years that I've been away, could you imagine? Uninterrupted, pure pleasure of just being able to study. While physically I may have not have much physically, but spiritually I got everything I could have wanted. And Rabbi Shimon becomes a new status of a person that what we call Torah so emunato. His Torah is his work, is his faith, and his whole craft. And he's the first person that really lives on this level, where the Torah tells us, because he never wasted a single moment, and every single moment he used for study, he wasn't obligated to pray even. All he had to do is say the first line of Shema once a day. It's a whole new status, but it's a status of a person that they're able to, so to speak, almost fulfill all these mitzvot through studying. Now, the Talmud goes on to tell us after he comes back, numerous miraculous things that happen from Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. One famous story is once there was a terrible drought for years in the land of Israel. People were really suffering and dying because there was no water and there was no food. And they eventually decided to turn to Rabbi Shimon. And Rabbi Shimon, he said the famous statement, "Hinei ma tov u'manayim," how great and how pleasant it is, Shevet Achim Gam Yachad, the sitting of brothers together. That becomes a famous song that we sing on Lag BaOmer, supposedly when the Israeli soldiers were on the plane to free the captives in Uganda. In Entebbe, they were singing that song. At least in the movies, they do it. But it's a very famous song. And apparently, when Rabbi Shimon says that line, he caused rain to come throughout the land of Israel, and everybody was. So we were told that just by Rabbi Shimon, all he had to do was say words of Torah, and it had an incredible impact on the world. One other episode that we know of Rabbi, that I'll just quickly say of Rabbi Shimon, because there's a lot more to say about him, is that he once is sent. There's a terrible decree made again by the Romans against Torah study in the Jewish community, and they decide to send Rabbi Shimon, now been forgotten by the Romans, and nobody knows that he even still exists. They thought that he'd given up and been erased from his books, as the representative of the Jewish people. And when he arrives there, he finds out that the emperor, I can't remember who the emperor was at the time, but the emperor's daughter was particularly unwell, and nobody had a cure for him. And Rabbi Shimon goes and says, "I'd like to try to cure the daughter." Of course, he successfully cures the emperor's daughter. And the emperor says, "How can I reward you for what you've done?" And he says, "Well, I would like the decrees that have been made against the Jewish people. I'd like to have them." And he takes them and he annuls them. And that's the way Rabbi Shimon takes care of that. But famously, at his deathbed, there was like a fire in the room. His students around him, and he says, "I don't want people to cry when I pass away. I want my passing to become a great day of celebration," because the Zohar and his teachings were all about how life is more importantly celebrated when it's a soul-focused life. And therefore, because my life was never about physicality, it was never about anything physical. It was always about the spirituality within the physical. I want us to recognize that my life, my physical passing, I may be dying physically, but spiritually, what he left behind, the Zohar, which is revealed later in the 12th century, or I think it was the 12th century, by a man named Reb Moshe ben Shem Tov of Leon or something like that. I think that was his name. And of course, secular scholars like to say, well, he must have written it because we didn't know much about it beforehand. But we do know that the Zohar was written by Rabbi Shimon, at least that's our tradition. And he also writes two books besides, like known as Sifri and Mechilta, of Rabbi Shimon. So he becomes one of the greatest rabbis in Jewish history, of course, one of the most quoted in Talmud. So that's a short summary of his life and the most important points that I wanted you to know. But let's have a quick look at the statement, because we've already gone over time. The statement of him in this Mishnah. So what is Rabbi Shimon saying? He says, Shloisha she'achlu. If you remember last week, we spoke about a statement of Rav Chanina ben Trajan, where he talks about two people that are sitting, and he just talks about sitting, and they don't say the words of Torah. It's considered a sitting of lazy people, scornful people. Rabbi Shimon says, Shloisha she'achlu al shulchan echad. If you have three people that ate on one table, v'lo amru alav divrei Torah, and they didn't say on it words of Torah, it's as if they have eaten from idolatrous sacrifices. Shenemar, because it says in the Torah, because all their tables were filled with vomit and filth, devoid of any omnipresent. But if you had three people that ate on one table and they did not say words of Torah, it's as if they ate from the table of God. And then he says, because the pasuk says in Yechezkel and Ezekiel, "Veidaber Elai," this is, and he said to me, "This is the table which is before Hashem." So he says how you could turn your table from being a filthy. So what does he mean over here? So there's 2 points. First of all, in the previous thing we talked about talking and discussing, but they don't talk Torah. Over here he talks about particularly eating. And he really introduces the fact of the concept of when you're sitting with other people, you have to make sure to say a Dvar Torah. You have to say something of holiness. Why? Because as we mentioned last week, he says our food, it has this sort of like mundane physicalness to it. It feels very enjoyable and physical, and it kind of could remain in that way as just being a mundane, pleasurable thing. And therefore he calls it, from his perspective, when you just take physicality and mundane things, and having looked at his life, how he actually came out of the cave and he burns this person that's involved in mundane things, because he wasn't able to see the holiness in what the person was doing. He wasn't able to see anything great about the person. So from his perspective, when we aren't able to raise our physical standing and not able to lift up the game and make something holy of it, we've missed the point. We've missed the point in the food. We've missed the point in why we were given food and why we're eating. There's an interesting line, which I didn't say, where he says somewhere else in the Talmud, he says, if I would have had a choice in the way I was created, there's one thing I would have changed. The one thing I would have changed is I would have created myself with two mouths. I would have created man with two mouths. Why? Because I have to stop studying Torah when I have to eat. I have no choice. I have to eat, but in that time I have to stop studying Torah. And then he said afterwards, actually, while the statement stays, in others, while he said the statement stays, he says, but in truth, I wouldn't want to, because two could also give us the opportunity to double the amount of bag. Some people, they don't have enough space in one mouth to put all the food that they want to put in once, so they would use it for double bad, or people would speak double evil. So therefore he says it's actually a good thing that we have to stop and eat and sometimes stop saying negativity or positive or other things, and actually have the opportunity to take what we've studied and bring it out in our food. When we're studying and when we're eating, we can lift it up. Because he wants that we shouldn't look as anything as mundane as plain mundane. Once again, remembering when he passes away, what does he say? I want it to be a celebration. Why do I want it to be a celebration? Because I want people to acknowledge that life is not about my mundane and physical life existence. I want people to acknowledge that my life is beyond the physical. And the same thing is when I have to be involved in food, taking care of my physical body, I want to raise that up, that it should be full with something spiritual, words of Torah, and elevated. So that's why you see that the statement is very much the statement of his life, which is all about lifting up physicality, that you should see the spirituality within it. And if you don't see the spirituality in it from Rabbi Shimon's perspective, then you've missed the point. You literally have missed the whole point of all that physicality. Just to get physical pleasure and to have enjoy food for its own sake, to him was pointless, because it's all there to be lifted up and raised to a higher level. Okay. All right. So that's the main thing that I wanted to discuss today. And thank you for joining. If anybody wants to stay on and ask anything, you're welcome to.
Rabbi, I'd like to ask a question on what we just covered there.
Yes.
Not to challenge anything, but on the contrary, to possible connection to another practice. So Shulchan Aruch Shel Makom, I think it mentions so the table of God and the concept of three gathering. Is that the origin of the when benching? If there are three sit together and then the benching changes?
That's an interesting point, because you're saying that when we bench, in order to do a mezuman, we have to actually have three people. I don't know if that's the origin. There certainly is a new holiness that we're told when you have three adult Jews sitting together. Did you know that halakhically, women cannot have a minyan by themselves? So there's no obligation for women to have a minyan. But women, why? Because women are not obligated to daven, especially not with the minyan. So therefore, they can't make a minyan, right? Because you can only be part of a minyan and make a minyan if you're obligated. But women are obligated to bench after the meal because it's not a time-bound prayer. Davening is a time-bound. There's particular times of the day that we have to do it. Benching or grace after meals is any time you eat, whether it's midnight, midday, or any other time of the day. Whenever you do it, you have to pray. So women are just as obligated in grace after meals and benching as men are. They have the same biblical obligation that we have. When you eat and you're satisfied, you have to bench, praise God. So therefore, women in theory can also make a mezuzah. The practice has become so they can be. Generally, we say that men can only make a mezuzah for modesty reasons. They said, nevertheless, men should make one with men and women should make one with women. The general practice is, for a discussion beyond today's discussion, that when men are sitting together, we do make a mezuzah, and if there's women around, they can join, but they can't be counted in the men's. And if there's women, they can. If there's only three women, they can make. But generally, I haven't seen that as being the practice of women actually doing it.
So very interesting. So the obligation for when three people sit at a table to discuss Torah, does that apply to women as well?
That's an interesting question. That is a very interesting question. If three women are sitting together, it's an interesting question. I'll tell you why it's an interesting question, because women do not have the same obligation as men to study Torah. Okay, so women historically don't have a major obligation. All women are obligated when it comes to studying Torah is to study the Torah that is applicable to them. Within the modern world, the Rabbi taught that today's day and age, with the world of equality and women being the workforce, etc., and not just staying at home and taking care of the house, women should be studying just as much as men. But that's not the law of the Torah. Men are obligated, from a biblical perspective, to daven, to do Perek Achat Shachris, one chapter in the morning and one chapter in the evening at the very least, to study twice. Women do not have that obligation of studying for the sake of studying. So therefore, I would answer that probably not. They don't have that same obligation. And therefore, perhaps what he's saying over here, Rabbi Shimon, who's particularly referring to men. And nevertheless, being that in today's day and age, women do study just as much as men to a certain degree. It definitely is a good thing for women to do it. And in most religious circles, when girls sit together, they probably are better at it than men, to be honest. They probably do this better than us. Just because they're more naturally spiritual and inclined to do the right thing. Okay, shall we stop there?
Yes, thank you very much,
Thank
Rabbi.
you.
Thank you. Have a great day. Thanks for joining. Have a wonderful Shabbos.
Thank you.
Thank
See
you.
you guys.
Too, Rabbi. Thank you.
Bye.